The observation deck of the Galactic Conclave's neutral station hummed with the voices of three great powers. Commander Thex of the Kron Dominion stood tall, his scales gleaming under the artificial lights. Across from him, the crystalline forms of the Silicate Collective pulsed with calculated thought. Between them, the elegant representatives of the Valorn Empire sat in their floating chairs, their long robes trailing like water. They had been arguing for 6 hours, the same argument they had been having for 20 years. The Veyrath system belongs to the Kron by right of conquest, Thex growled, his clawed hand striking the table. The sound echoed through the chamber. Your conquest attempt failed 3 times, the Silicate spokesman replied, its voice like wind through crystal caves. The system's resources should be distributed based on computational efficiency. We calculate the optimal outcome. Both of you ignore tradition, Ambassador Rayeth of the Valorn said, her voice carrying centuries of authority. The Veyrath system has been under Valorn protection for 4,000 years. Our ancestors. A soft chime interrupted the familiar dance of accusations. Every head turned toward the entrance. A small figure walked through the doors, escorted by a minor functionary who looked deeply uncomfortable with his task. Dr. Sarah Chen was not impressive by galactic standards. She stood barely 2 meters tall, covered in simple gray clothing that matched her short dark hair. She carried a single data pad and wore no weapons, no ceremonial armor, no technology that glowed or hummed with power. Behind her, visible through the viewport, a small human diplomatic vessel hung in space. It looked like a toy compared to the massive warships of the 3 powers. The human observer has arrived, the functionary announced nervously. The chamber fell silent. Then Commander Thex laughed. It was a deep rumbling sound that spoke of battles won and enemies crushed. This is Earth's representative? This small thing? He looked at his fellow commanders. The species that still uses chemical rockets to reach their own moon? Sarah walked to the empty observer's chair at the edge of the negotiation table. She sat down, placed her datapad in front of her, and looked up at the 3 powers with calm brown eyes. I am Dr. Sarah Chen, representing Earth and humanity. We have been granted observer status by the Galactic Conclave. We are here to learn from the great civilizations of the galaxy. The Silicate Collective's crystals flickered with what might have been amusement. Your neural processing speed is 0.04% of ours. What could you possibly learn that your primitive brain could comprehend? Everything I can, Sarah replied simply. She activated her datapad and began taking notes. Ambassador Rayeth studied the human with ancient eyes. Observer status means you may watch and listen, but you have no voice in these proceedings. No vote, no authority. Do you understand? I understand perfectly, Sarah said. I'm just here to observe. The negotiations continued. For the next 4 hours, Sarah sat quietly in her chair, her fingers moving across her datapad. She asked no questions. She made no comments. She simply watched and recorded. When the session ended with no progress, as it always did, Commander Thex stood and stretched his powerful frame. He noticed the human still sitting there reviewing her notes. What are you writing, little observer? He asked, his tone mocking. I'm trying to understand why 3 intelligent species cannot resolve a simple resource dispute, Sarah said, not looking up from her screen. Simple? The Silicate spokesman drifted closer. You call 20 years of deadlock simple. I call the problem simple, Sarah corrected. The solution seems to be the complicated part. She finally looked up. May I ask some questions? To help me understand your positions better? Over the next week, Sarah attended every session. She arrived early and stayed late. She asked questions that the other species found strange. To the Kron, she asked, what does military honor mean to your people? How do your supply chains work? What would your warriors consider a victory worth celebrating? To the Silicate Collective, she asked, how do you calculate value? What variables matter most in your decision matrices? How long does it take your collective to reach consensus? To the Valorn Empire, she asked, who owes whom favors in your government? How are disputes between noble houses traditionally resolved? What would cause your people to lose face? The 3 powers answered her questions, each seeing an opportunity. If they could impress this primitive human, perhaps Earth would become an ally. A weak ally was better than another enemy. But some observers from other species began to feel uneasy. A diplomat from the Minor Crix Confederation approached Sarah during a break. You ask very specific questions. Crick said quietly. Questions about culture and psychology, not just about the Veyrath system. Sarah smiled. The best way to understand a problem is to understand the people who have it. After 2 weeks, Sarah made an unusual request. She asked to visit each power's home territory, to tour their worlds and see their civilizations firsthand. Commander Thex agreed immediately. Come see the might of the Kron Dominion. Perhaps then you will understand true strength. The Silicate Collective calculated the propaganda value and consented. The Valorn Empire granted permission as a courtesy to a lesser species. As Sarah prepared to depart on her tour, Crix found her again. What is Earth really doing here? Why send an observer to a conflict that doesn't concern your world? Sarah packed her datapad carefully. We're new to the galaxy. We need to understand how things work out here. How conflicts start. How they end. How the great powers think. And then, Sarah looked out at the stars beyond the viewport. And then we'll know how to survive out here. That's all any species wants, isn't it? To survive and find their place. She boarded her small ship and departed, beginning her journey to visit the 3 greatest powers in the galaxy. Behind her, the negotiations at the Conclave station continued, going nowhere as they had for 20 years. None of them knew that. Everything was about to change. None of them suspected that the quiet human observer was not just learning about them, she was learning how to beat them. Sarah's ship approached the Kron homeworld 3 days later. The planet filled her viewport, a world of red deserts and dark oceans. Surrounding it, hundreds of warships hung in perfect formation. Each vessel bristled with weapons that could crack a moon in half. Commander Thex himself met her at the orbital station. Welcome to Kron Prime, human. Today you will see what real power looks like. He led her through military academies where young Kron learned combat from the moment they could walk. Sarah watched training exercises, asked questions about their tactics, and studied the way officers commanded their troops. Your warriors train for 12 years before seeing combat, she observed, making notes. That's a significant investment. A Kron warrior is worth 10 soldiers of any other species, Thex said proudly. We do not waste time on weaklings. Sarah nodded and wrote something on her datapad. And your supply lines? How do you feed and equip armies across multiple star systems? Thex frowned. Why do you ask about logistics? That is not the glorious part of war. I'm curious about everything, Sarah said simply. Back on Earth, we have a saying. Amateurs talk strategy, professionals talk logistics. The commander laughed and showed her anyway. He took her to fleet coordination centers, supply depots, and the massive industrial worlds that fed the Kron war machine. He showed her patrol routes, defensive formations, and the communication networks that connected their empire. Your people follow a strict code of honor, Sarah said during dinner in the officers' mess. You value direct confrontation over deception. A warrior who wins through trickery is shamed. Of course, Thex said. Victory without honor is no victory at all. This is what separates the Kron from lesser species who scheme and hide. Sarah made more notes. She asked about rival commanders, internal politics, and what the Kron considered their greatest military achievement. Thex answered every question, pleased that the primitive human was finally learning what true civilization looked like. When she departed, Thex told his officers, the human asks good questions. Perhaps their species is not completely hopeless. Sarah's next stop was the Silicate Collective's central processing world. The entire planet was one massive computer, crystalline structures kilometers high that pulsed with light and thought. The spokesmind greeted her consciousness to consciousness, a strange sensation for Sarah's organic brain. She felt their thoughts moving at speeds her mind could barely follow. We have slowed our processing to a rate you can comprehend, the collective informed her. This conversation would normally take 0.03 seconds. For you, we will extend it to several hours. I appreciate your patience, Sarah said. She toured their data centers, quantum calculation matrices, and the nodes where thousands of individual silicates merged into one vast intelligence. She asked about their decision-making processes. How do you reach consensus? What happens when different parts of the collective disagree? Disagreement is inefficient, the spokesmind explained. We calculate all possibilities, weight probabilities, and select the optimal outcome. Emotion does not cloud our judgment as it does for organic species. But the Veyrath dispute has lasted 20 years, Sarah pointed out. Why hasn't calculation solved it? The collective's crystals dimmed slightly. The other powers do not accept mathematical truth. They inject irrational variables like pride and tradition. These cannot be calculated. Sarah spent days studying their networks, asking about processing speeds, redundancy systems, and how information flowed through the collective. She asked what would happen if certain nodes were disrupted, how they protected against system corruption, and what their greatest computational achievement had been. The Silicate Collective found her questions surprisingly sophisticated. You understand more than we expected. Your species' computer technology is primitive, but you grasp the theoretical concepts. We're good at learning, Sarah said. Her final stop was the Valorn Empire's capital world, a planet of soaring towers and floating gardens that had stood for 10,000 years. Ambassador Rayeth received her in a palace that made Earth's greatest buildings look like temporary shelters. You honor us with your visit, Rayeth said, the formal words carrying layers of meaning that Sarah was beginning to understand. The Valorn culture was complex, built on thousands of years of tradition, debt, and obligation. Every interaction carried weight. Every favor given required a favor returned. The entire society functioned like an intricate machine of mutual dependence. Sarah studied their historical archives, learning about ancient alliances and betrayals that still influenced current politics. She asked about bloodlines and inheritance, about which families held power and how they maintained it. Your empire is held together by webs of connection, Sarah observed. Every house owes something to another house. Every leader is bound by obligations made by their ancestors. This is what civilization means, Rayeth said. Order maintained through mutual respect and the weight of history, not through crude force or cold calculation. But it makes change difficult, Sarah said. When every decision might dishonor an ancient agreement or upset a traditional balance, Rayeth's expression hardened. Stability is more valuable than change. This is why we have endured while younger civilizations have risen and fallen. Sarah was given access to political councils, trade negotiations, and diplomatic ceremonies. She watched how the Valorn navigated their complex social rules, how they used indirect language to avoid direct confrontation, and how reputation was everything in their world. One evening, Ambassador Rayeth asked her directly, "What does Earth want from the galaxy, Dr. Chen?" "Understanding," Sarah replied. "We're new here. We don't know the rules yet. We don't know how your civilizations work. We're trying to learn before we make mistakes." A wise approach, Rayeth admitted, though I wonder what a primitive species could do with such knowledge. During her travels, Sarah maintained contact with Crix, the minor diplomat who had befriended her. They spoke through encrypted channels, and Crix grew increasingly curious about the humans' methods. "You're not just observing," Crix said during one call. "You're studying them like a scientist studies specimens. What are you looking for?" "Pattern," Sarah said. "Every species has them. Every culture has rules it follows, buttons that can be pushed, fears that drive decisions. I'm just trying to see the patterns." "That sounds almost predatory," Sarah smiled. "On Earth we have many predators, but the most successful ones don't have the biggest claws or the sharpest teeth. They're the ones who understand their prey's behavior." After 3 months, Sarah returned to the conclave station. She had filled thousands of pages with notes, observations, and analysis. She compiled it all into a massive report and submitted it to the Galactic Council. Most species ignored it. 40,000 pages written by a primitive human? Nobody had time for that. The deadlock at the conclave continued. The three powers argued, threatened, and postured as they had for 20 years. Sarah attended every session, still sitting quietly in her observer's chair, still taking notes. But now, when she looked at Commander Thex, she saw every weakness in his supply chains. When the Silicate spokesmind spoke, she heard the gaps in their logic. When Ambassador Rayeth made her formal statements, Sarah recognized every political pressure point hidden beneath the diplomatic language. 4 months after her return, Sarah made a formal request. She wanted to address all three powers simultaneously. She had a proposal to end the Veyrath dispute. The reaction was immediate and dismissive. "The human thinks she can solve what we cannot," Thex laughed. "Her computational capacity is insufficient for this problem," the collective calculated. "Let her speak," Rayeth said with barely concealed amusement. "It will be educational for her to see how complex real politics are." The session was scheduled for the following week. Sarah prepared her presentation, while the galaxy's powers whispered about the naive human who thought she could teach her betters. Crix visited her the night before the address. Are you sure about this? If you fail, Earth's reputation will be destroyed before it even begins. Sarah looked up from her work. Her expression was calm, but Crix saw something else behind her eyes. Something that looked almost like anticipation. I won't fail, Sarah said simply. How can you be so sure? Because I've been watching them for months. And they've only been watching me for seconds. The grand chamber was filled to capacity. Representatives from dozens of species crowded the observation galleries, curious to see what the human would say. The three great powers sat at their positions around the central table, their postures radiating confidence and barely concealed contempt. Sarah walked to the center of the chamber. She wore the same simple gray clothing she had worn since arriving. No ceremonial robes, no displays of wealth or power, just a human woman with a datapad. Thank you for agreeing to hear my proposal, she began. Her voice was steady, neither too loud nor too soft. I have spent the last 4 months studying the Veyrath dispute. I have reviewed historical records, analyzed resource reports, and spoken with all parties involved. We know what we are fighting for, Commander Thex interrupted. We do not need a primitive species to explain it to us. Sarah nodded as if he had made a helpful comment. That's exactly the problem. You all know what you're fighting for, but what you're fighting for isn't what you actually need. The chamber fell quiet. Ambassador Rayeth leaned forward slightly. Explain. Sarah activated her datapad. A holographic display appeared above the table, showing the Veyrath system in detail. The Veyrath system has 17 planets, 43 moons, and 3 asteroid belts. It contains rare minerals, strategic positioning, and significant military value. For 20 years you have all claimed you need this system, but that isn't true. You dare call us liars? The silicate spokesman said, its crystals flashing with what might have been anger. No. I'm saying you're trapped by your own positions. Commander Thex, the Kron don't need the Veyrath system. You need a military victory to justify your fleet expansion to your warrior caste. The actual resources in Veyrath, you can get them cheaper through trade. Thex's scales darkened. The Kron do not trade for what we can take. Exactly. It's not about resources. It's about honor and reputation. You can't back down because your warriors would see it as weakness. Sarah turned to the Silicate Collective. You don't need the Veyrath system either. Yes, it contains computational minerals, but you've already found 3 other systems with better deposits. I read your own survey reports. Veyrath is actually your 4th best option for expansion. Then why do we continue to claim it? The spokesman asked, genuinely curious now. Because you calculated that surrendering the claim would damage your negotiating position in 17 other disputes across the galaxy. You're not fighting for Veyrath. You're fighting to maintain your reputation as an uncompromising power. The crystals pulsed. Your analysis is partially accurate. Sarah finally turned to Ambassador Rayeth. And the Veylorn Empire. You claim historical protection rights over Veyrath. But your own archives show that the system was abandoned 600 years ago. You don't have colonists there. You don't have economic interests there. You have a piece of paper from 4,000 years ago. Rayeth's expression remained neutral, but her hands tightened on her chair's armrests. Tradition is not meaningless. No, it's not. But you're not defending tradition. You're defending the illusion that the Veylorn Empire is still what it was 2,000 years ago. You can't let go of Veyrath because it would mean admitting that your empire has changed, that the old ways don't work anymore. The chamber erupted. Delegates from all 3 powers began shouting. Security officers moved toward the exits, ready to intervene if the situation escalated. Sarah stood calmly in the center of the chaos, waiting. Ambassador Rayeth raised her hand. Silence fell immediately. You have analyzed our public positions well, human. But analysis is not solution. If we are all fighting for reputation and perception rather than actual resources, as you claim, then the problem is impossible. None of us can surrender without losing face. That's where you're wrong, Sarah said. She swiped her datapad and the holographic display changed. A new map appeared showing trade routes, resource locations, and military positions across multiple star systems. Here's my proposal. Commander Thex, the Kron Dominion will withdraw all claims to the Veyrath system. In exchange, the Galactic Conclave will officially recognize your successful defense of the Corinth Barrier against the Outer Rim pirates last year. Your history books will record that the Kron chose to prioritize the protection of peaceful species over territorial expansion. That's not weakness. That's strength. Thex opened his mouth to object, but Sarah continued quickly. The Silicate Collective will also withdraw claims. In exchange, you will receive priority access to the Helix Nebula computational resources and exclusive survey rights to 3 systems that actually have better minerals than Veyrath. Plus, your withdrawal will be recorded as logical optimization rather than surrender. Your reputation for rational decision-making is enhanced. The spokesmind's crystals flickered thoughtfully. The Veilorn Empire will formally release its historical claim. In exchange, the Conclave will establish a new cultural heritage preservation fund, with the Veilorn as primary administrators. You protect the past across the galaxy, not just in one system. Your role as guardians of tradition grows stronger, not weaker. Sarah looked at each power in turn. You all get what you actually need. The Kron get military honor. The Silicate get optimal resources. The Veilorn get enhanced prestige. And none of you have to admit defeat because you're all gaining something more valuable than Veyrath ever was. The chamber was silent. Delegates looked at each other, calculating, considering. And what does Earth gain from this proposal? Ambassador Rayeth asked quietly. Earth gets to show the galaxy that we understand how things work out here, that we can solve problems, that we're not just primitive observers. Sarah smiled slightly. Also, we'd like a seat at the table. Real membership in the Galactic Conclave, not just observer status. Commander Thex stood abruptly. You expect us to reward you for stating the obvious? You think pretty words and clever analysis will make us surrender what we have fought for? No, Sarah said. I expect you to reject this proposal. That's why I prepared alternatives. Alternatives? The Silicate spokesmind asked. Sarah's expression didn't change, but something in her eyes grew colder. You invited me to observe. You showed me your worlds, your systems, your cultures. You answered my questions. You thought I was just a naive human trying to learn from her betters. She gestured, and the holographic display changed again. But while I was learning about your civilizations, I was also learning about your weaknesses. The display now showed a series of tactical maps, computational diagrams, and political networks. Every species in the chamber recognized their own systems being analyzed in ways they had never seen before. This is classified information, Thex growled. No, Sarah corrected. This is public information analyzed by someone who knows how to look at it properly. Human intelligence agencies have been doing this for centuries on Earth. We call it open source intelligence. You don't need to steal secrets when people give you enough information to figure everything out. The displays continued to shift, showing more and more analysis. Supply chain vulnerabilities. Network architecture weaknesses. Political pressure points. What is the meaning of this? Ambassador Rayeth demanded, her diplomatic composure finally cracking. Sarah met her gaze steadily. The meaning is simple. If you don't accept my peaceful solution, I will be forced to present my alternatives. And I promise you, none of the 3 great powers want to see what I discovered while I was observing. Crix, watching from the observation gallery, whispered to another minor delegate. She's been building leverage this whole time. Every question she asked, every tour she took. She wasn't just learning. She was gathering ammunition. The 3 powers looked at the displays, then at each other, then at the small human standing calmly in the center of their storm. You dare threaten us, Thex said, but there was less certainty in his voice now. I'm not threatening you, Sarah replied. I'm offering you a choice. Take the peaceful solution where everyone wins, or force me to reveal information that will hurt all of you. The choice has always been yours. Ambassador Rayeth stood slowly. We need time to consider this. Of course, Sarah said. You have 3 days. After that, one way or another, the Veyrath dispute ends. The session was adjourned. As delegates filed out, whispers filled the chamber. The small human observer had just backed 3 of the galaxy's greatest powers into a corner, and nobody was quite sure how she had done it. The 3 days that followed were the longest in recent galactic history. The grand chamber remained empty, but everywhere else on the conclave station, frantic activity consumed the 3 great powers. Commander Thex called an emergency meeting of his senior officers. They gathered in a secure room, shielded from all surveillance. Show me what the human displayed, Thex demanded. His intelligence chief activated a holographic replay of Sarah's presentation. The tactical analysis appeared, showing Kron fleet movements, supply routes, and patrol patterns. But what made every officer in the room uncomfortable was the additional layer of data. She identified 17 critical weaknesses in our formation strategy. The intelligence chief said quietly, 7 supply bottlenecks that would cripple our fleet within 40 days if disrupted, and a complete map of our communication relay network. How did she get this information? Thex slammed his fist on the table. She didn't steal it, sir. She observed it. Every question she asked during her visit, every tour we gave her, every answer we provided. She put the pieces together like solving a puzzle. Another officer spoke up. It gets worse. She mapped our warrior culture's honor system. She knows exactly which commanders have political rivalries. She identified 14 internal conflicts that could be exploited. Thex was silent for a long moment. Could she actually use this information effectively? If she released this to our enemies? Yes, but more importantly, she released it in a public chamber. Every species saw it. Every potential rival now knows we have vulnerabilities we were not aware of. The damage is already done, Thex realized. Even if we destroy the human, the information is out there. Meanwhile, on the Silicate Collective's processing ship, billions of calculations ran simultaneously. The Collective was trying to understand what had happened. Analysis complete, the spokesmind announced to itself. The human identified a theoretical vulnerability in our consensus protocol. A carefully designed informational input could introduce processing delays of 0.3 seconds. For organic species, 0.3 seconds was barely noticeable. For the Silicate Collective, whose thoughts moved at the speed of light, it might as well be an eternity. Probability that such an attack could be constructed, 78%, another processing node calculated. Probability that we could defend against it once aware, 95%. Probability that other species will now research similar attacks, 99%. The Collective pulsed with the closest thing to anxiety a silicon-based intelligence could feel. The human has changed the game. She has shown the galaxy how to hurt us. Further analysis. She also mapped our resource needs, our expansion priorities, and our decision-making patterns. Other species can now predict our actions. Conclusion. Remaining as enemies of Earth is now suboptimal. In the Valorn Empire's embassy section, Ambassador Rayeth sat alone in her chambers, reading through reports from her intelligence services. Her hands shook slightly as she turned the pages. Sarah had not just mapped Valorn politics. She had uncovered secrets that the Empire had spent centuries burying. Bloodlines that were not legitimate. Ancient debts that powerful families had never repaid. Scandals that would destroy houses if they became public. How? Rayeth whispered to herself. Our security is perfect. Our secrets are protected by layers of encryption and misdirection. But as she read Sarah's analysis, she understood. The human had not hacked anything. She had simply paid attention. A conversation here. A historical record there, a pattern in political marriages, an inconsistency in genealogical records. Sarah had reconstructed secrets from the shadows they cast. Worse, she had demonstrated something terrifying. She understood the Valorn culture well enough to know exactly which revelations would cause maximum damage. A message arrived from the Imperial Council on the homeworld. Rayeth read it with growing dread. The human must be neutralized. Her knowledge threatens the stability of the Empire. Rayeth composed her reply carefully. Killing her would trigger information release. She stated this explicitly. We must assume she has dead man protocols in place. Across the station in her modest quarters, Sarah sat reviewing her preparations. Crix had insisted on visiting, worried about her safety. The three powers are panicking, Crix said. Security reports show increased military readiness. They're afraid of you. Fear isn't the goal, Sarah said calmly. Understanding is, you threatened them. You revealed their secrets. They might try to kill you regardless of the consequences. Sarah shook her head. They won't. Because I showed them something more important than the secrets themselves. What? I showed them that I could have kept silent. I could have sold these secrets to their enemies. I could have used them for Earth's advantage. Instead, I offered them a peaceful solution first. That's the real message. Crix thought about this. You're showing them that Earth prefers cooperation over exploitation. Exactly. But I'm also showing them that we're capable of exploitation, if forced to it. It's the balance that matters. Too weak and they ignore you. Too aggressive and they destroy you. But show them you could hurt them but choose not to. That's when they listen. That's a very thin line to walk, Sarah smiled. Humanity has been walking thin lines for millions of years. It's what we're good at. On the second day, Sarah received 3 separate visitors. Commander Thex came first. He entered her quarters without ceremony, his massive frame filling the doorway. I want to know one thing, human. Is your information accurate? Every word, Sarah replied. Would you like me to prove it? I can tell you the name of the officer on your ship who is planning to challenge your command in the next cycle. I can tell you which supply depot has been reporting false inventory numbers. I can tell you— Stop! Thex held up a clawed hand. I believe you. He was quiet for a moment. You could destroy us with this information. Yes. But you offered peace first, yes. Why? Sarah stood and looked the massive warrior in the eyes. Because war is expensive, Commander. For everyone. I don't want to be Earth's destroyer. I want to be Earth's builder. But I will be a destroyer if that's the only option you give me. Thex studied her for a long time. Then he did something surprising. He lowered his head slightly, a gesture of respect among the Kron. You would have made a good warrior, human. I am a warrior, Commander. I just use different weapons. The silicate spokesmind visited next, its crystalline form refracting light in complex patterns. We have calculated all possible outcomes, it said. Fighting Earth results in negative value for all parties. Cooperation results in optimal outcomes. I'm glad your calculations agree with my intuition, Sarah said. Intuition is inefficient, yet you used it to reach the correct conclusion faster than our processing. This is confusing. Not all problems can be solved with pure logic, Sarah explained. Sometimes you need to understand the emotions and cultures involved. That's where humans excel. You have taught us something valuable, Dr. Chen. There are different types of intelligence. We were wrong to dismiss yours as primitive. Ambassador Rayeth came last, late in the evening. She looked tired, older than when Sarah had first met her. You have shaken the foundations of my empire, Rayeth said quietly. I have revealed cracks that were already there. Sarah countered gently. I didn't create your problems. I just showed you that they're visible to those who know how to look. What will you do with this knowledge? That depends on what you do with my proposal. Accept it and all my files are deleted. Reject it. And I give my information to historians who will be very interested in the true story of the Valorn Empire. Rayeth sat down, a breach of protocol that showed how exhausted she was. You have given us an impossible choice. No, I've given you an easy choice. You just don't like it because it requires admitting that the galaxy has changed, that the old ways need to adapt. And if we choose wrong, Sarah's expression softened, then everyone loses, Ambassador, including me. Including Earth. I don't want that outcome. This isn't about victory, it's about survival. On the third day, the Grand Chamber reconvened. Every seat was filled. The tension in the air was thick enough to taste. The 3 great powers entered together, a sight that had not been seen in 20 years. Sarah stood in the center, alone, waiting. Commander Thex spoke first. The Kron Dominion has considered the humans' proposal. The galaxy held its breath. We accept. The words echoed through the Grand Chamber. Commander Thex stood tall, his scales gleaming, his voice carrying the weight of decision. The Kron Dominion accepts the humans' proposal. We withdraw our claim to the Veyrath system, not from weakness, but from strength. We choose to be protectors rather than conquerors. Let the galaxy remember that the Kron can show wisdom as well as might. The chamber erupted in shocked whispers. A minor delegate fainted. Crix gripped the railing of the observation gallery, hardly believing what was happening. The silicate spokesmind's crystals pulsed with light. The collective has completed its calculations. Cooperation yields 94.7% better outcomes than continued conflict. We accept the proposal. Our withdrawal is based on logical optimization of resources and strategic positioning. This decision enhances our reputation for rational action. All eyes turned to Ambassador Rayeth. The ancient Valorn diplomat stood slowly, her robes falling in perfect folds around her. For a moment, no one knew what she would say. The Valorn Empire, and she began, then paused. The Valorn Empire has endured for 10,000 years by understanding when to hold firm and when to adapt. We release our historical claim to the Veyrath system. In its place, we accept our new role as guardians of galactic heritage. Tradition is not about clinging to the past. It is about carrying the best of it forward. The chamber exploded in noise. Delegates from dozens of species began shouting, arguing, celebrating. The three great powers had just ended a 20-year deadlock in 3 minutes. Sarah stood quietly in the center of it all, her expression neutral. She had won, but she showed no triumph. That was part of the victory, too. Let them believe this was their choice, their wisdom, their decision. The conclave administrator, a being of pure energy who rarely spoke, manifested in the chamber. Its voice silenced everyone. The proposal is accepted by all parties. The Veyrath dispute is resolved. Implementation will begin immediately. It turned its attention to Sarah. As agreed, the human species is granted full membership in the Galactic Conclave, with all rights and responsibilities. Earth will have a permanent seat on the council. More chaos, more shouting. Some species protested that Earth had not earned this honor. Others argued that the humans had proven themselves more capable than civilizations 10 times older. Sarah walked to her new seat at the council table. No longer an observer, a participant. Over the following days, Sarah's proposal was put into action with remarkable speed. The Kron received formal recognition for their defense of the Corinth Barrier. Their military academies added new courses about strategic wisdom versus simple aggression. Commander Thex found his political position strengthened, not weakened. The Silicate Collective gained survey rights to 3 resource-rich systems. Their calculations proved correct. These systems yielded 340% more valuable minerals than Veyrath would have provided. The Collective's reputation for logical decision-making grew across the galaxy. The Valorn Empire established the Cultural Heritage Preservation Fund with great ceremony. Ambassador Rayeth became its first director. Ancient houses that had been threatened by Sarah's secrets found new purpose in protecting galactic history. The Empire adapted, and in adapting found renewed strength. And the Veyrath system itself? It was declared neutral territory, administered by the Conclave for the benefit of all species. The thing they had fought over for 20 years became something no one had considered. Shared space. A week after the resolution, Sarah met with Crix in a quiet observation deck. They watched stars drift past the viewport. "I still don't understand how you did it," Crix admitted. "You had no weapons, no fleet, no economic power. You were one human against 3 empires." Sarah considered her answer carefully. "On Earth we have many apex predators. Lions, sharks, eagles. Powerful creatures with claws and teeth and strength. But humans? We don't have any of that. We're relatively weak, slow, and fragile. Then how did you survive? By being smarter than our prey. By understanding behavior and patterns. By working together and communicating. By using tools and information instead of claws and teeth." She turned to look at Crix. "I didn't beat the 3 powers with force. I beat them with understanding. You knew their weaknesses. Everyone has weaknesses. The trick is knowing which ones matter and which ones don't. The Kron's weakness isn't their supply lines. It's their need to be seen as honorable. The Silicate's weakness isn't their processing speed. It's their assumption that logic is the only valid way to make decisions. The Valorn's weakness isn't their secrets. It's their inability to admit the galaxy has changed." Crix absorbed this. "So you gave them what they actually needed instead of what they claimed to want." "Exactly. Most conflicts aren't really about what people say they're about. They're about fear, pride, identity, and perception. If you can see the real problem, you can find real solutions. But you also threaten them." Sarah nodded. "Because understanding alone isn't enough. You need leverage. You need them to know that cooperation is in their best interest. I showed them I could hurt them, but I also showed them I preferred not to. That combination is what changed their minds." A thought occurred to Crix. "Did you really have all that information? Or was some of it a bluff?" Sarah smiled but didn't answer directly. "What matters is that they believed I had it. That's another thing humans are good at. We understand the power of perception. Reality and belief are often the same thing in practice. That's terrifying. Maybe. But it's also why humanity will survive out here. We don't need to be the strongest or the smartest or the oldest. We just need to understand how the game is played." Later that evening, Sarah transmitted her report back to Earth. She sat alone in her quarters, recording her message for the leaders of her homeworld. "Earth's position in the galactic community is now secure. We have a seat on the council. We have proven that our species brings unique value to the galaxy." She paused, choosing her next words carefully. "But I want to be clear about what happened here. I didn't win through superior technology or military force. I won through information, psychology, and social engineering. The other species are beginning to understand what humans are capable of. They're studying us now, trying to figure out how we think. Some are frightened, some are intrigued, all of them are wary. My recommendation is that we continue this approach. We can't outfight the Kron, we can't outcalculate the Silicate, we can't out-tradition the Valorn, but we can outthink all of them by understanding them better than they understand themselves. Earth's greatest weapon isn't on our ships or in our laboratories. It's in our ability to see patterns, to understand motivations, to predict behavior. That's what millions of years of social evolution gave us. That's how we survived when stronger species died out. And that's how we'll thrive in the galaxy. She ended the transmission and looked out at the stars. Somewhere out there, other species were having similar conversations. The galaxy had underestimated humanity. That wouldn't happen again. 3 months later, the Galactic Conclave held its annual assembly. Sarah attended as Earth's full representative. She noticed how other delegates watched her now, with respect, with caution, with curiosity. Commander Thex approached her during a break. The Kron High Command wants to establish a cultural exchange with Earth. They want to study human military philosophy. We would be honored, Sarah replied. The Silicate spokesman drifted over. We are interested in collaborative research on decision-making processes that combine calculation with intuition. Your species' unique perspective could be valuable. We'd be happy to participate. Ambassador Rayeth joined the conversation. The Valorn Empire would like to invite Earth to participate in the Heritage Fund's Governing Council. Your understanding of cultural dynamics would be most useful. Sarah looked at the three of them, 3 great powers that had been locked in conflict for 2 decades. Now they were competing for Earth's friendship and cooperation. I think we can arrange something with all of you, she said diplomatically. After they left, Crix appeared beside her. You've changed the galaxy, you know. Everyone is reassessing humanity. Some minor species are trying to copy your methods. The major powers are teaching courses on human strategic thinking. Good, Sarah said. Let them learn. The galaxy is better when everyone understands each other. Aren't you worried they'll use your methods against you? Sarah shook her head. Information and understanding are not zero-sum resources. Them learning about us doesn't diminish us. Besides, while they're studying our methods, we're continuing to learn and adapt. That's another human trait. We never stop evolving. As the assembly continued, Sarah watched the various species interact. She saw patterns in their behavior, relationships in their alliances, opportunities in their conflicts. Her mind never stopped analyzing, never stopped learning. A young delegate from a newly discovered species approached her nervously. Dr. Chen, my people have just made contact with the galaxy. We're overwhelmed. We don't know how to navigate all these older, more powerful civilizations. Do you have any advice? Sarah smiled warmly. Yes. Watch and learn. Ask questions. Understand before you act. Don't try to be the strongest or the richest or the most advanced. Find what makes your species unique and valuable. Then show the galaxy why you deserve a seat at the table. That's what you did? That's what I did, and it worked. Not because I was better than them, but because I understood them better than they expected. The young delegate thanked her and hurried away. Sarah turned back to the assembly floor, where debates and negotiations continued. The galaxy had asked why the great powers yielded to a human observer. The answer was simple yet profound. Sarah had never stopped observing. She had watched their behaviors, mapped their patterns, understood their fears and desires. While they saw her as beneath notice, she had been quietly becoming the most dangerous person in the room, not because she had weapons, not because she had fleets or technology or ancient power, but because she understood them better than they understood themselves. And in a galaxy of countless species, each with their own strengths and powers, understanding was the ultimate advantage. The human observer had taught the galaxy a lesson they would never forget. Power comes in many forms, and sometimes The quietest voice in the room is the one that changes everything. Sarah took her seat at the council table, no longer an outsider, looking in, but a full participant in the galactic community. Earth had found its place among the stars, and the galaxy would never be quite the same.